14 warships, two of the most powerful aircraft carriers on the planet, over 5,000 American sailors sitting in the middle of the most dangerous sea lane in the world, and not a single Saudi soldier standing next to them. That is what is happening right now in the Middle East. And the question nobody is asking loudly enough is this: how did America end up here? Exactly where Saudi Arabia needed it to be, doing exactly what Saudi Arabia refused to do itself? This is not a coincidence. This is not an accident of history. This is one of the most carefully executed geopolitical traps of the 21st century. And the United States Navy walked right into it, with its eyes open, its engines running, and no clear path back out. Let us start from the beginning. Because to understand what is happening today, you have to understand a relationship that has been building quietly for nearly 8 decades, a relationship built on oil, security guarantees, and a very careful silence about who benefits most. Saudi Arabia and the United States have never been true allies in the traditional sense. They do not share a common ideology. They do not share values, at least not openly. What they share is something more transactional, more durable, and in many ways more dangerous. America wanted oil and access to the Middle East. Saudi Arabia wanted security from its neighbors and a superpower standing behind it. Both sides got what they wanted. Both sides learned to pretend the arrangement was built on principle rather than self-interest. And for decades, that was enough. But the world changed. And when the world changes, the foundations of old arrangements begin to crack. The shale revolution hit America like a geological bomb. Fracking technology unlocked vast reserves of oil and natural gas underneath American soil, turning the United States from the world's largest energy importer into one of its biggest energy producers almost overnight. Suddenly, Washington's dependence on Saudi oil was no longer an existential matter. Suddenly, American politicians could ask the question they had never been able to ask before. Why exactly are we protecting this kingdom? What are we getting out of this that we cannot get somewhere else? And more quietly, behind closed doors, are we still willing to send American soldiers to die in the desert to keep the Saudi royal family comfortable? Saudi Arabia saw this shift coming. The Saudi leadership is not sentimental. They are pragmatic to a degree that most Western observers consistently underestimate. They have survived decades of internal and external pressure by reading the currents of power with extraordinary precision and adjusting before the wind turns completely against them. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, who now effectively runs the kingdom, is the latest and most aggressive expression of that pragmatic tradition. He understood something crucial. If America's strategic interest in Saudi Arabia was eroding, then Saudi Arabia needed to manufacture a new American interest, not in Saudi Arabia itself, but in the problem that Saudi Arabia faced. The problem was Iran. And if Saudi Arabia could convince America that solving the Iran problem was America's problem too, an urgent, unavoidable, civilizational problem, then the American military machine would swing back toward the Gulf and stay there, whether it wanted to or not. To understand why this worked, you have to understand just how deeply Iran threatened Saudi Arabia's vision for itself and for the region. Iran and Saudi Arabia have been locked in a Cold War that has shaped the Middle East for 40 years. On the surface, it is a religious conflict. Sunni Islam represented by Riyadh, Shia Islam represented by Tehran. But beneath the theology, it is a brutal competition for regional dominance. Who controls the oil markets? Who shapes Arab politics? Who decides the fate of governments in Beirut, Baghdad, Damascus, and Sana'a? These are questions that Iran and Saudi Arabia have been fighting over for decades. Not directly, in open battle, but through proxy armies, funded militias, and strategic interference in every country between them. Iran built something remarkable over those decades. While Saudi Arabia spent money on palaces, weapons purchases, and Western influence, Iran built a network. The Houthis in Yemen became an Iranian-backed force that launched missiles and drones into Saudi territory. Hezbollah in Lebanon developed an arsenal estimated at over 100,000 rockets and turned itself into a state within a state. Shia militias in Iraq embedded themselves in the Iraqi government and military while maintaining secret loyalty to Tehran. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad kept his power partly because of Iranian support and Iranian fighters on the ground. This network is what military strategists call asymmetric power. Iran cannot match the United States or even Saudi Arabia in a conventional head-to-head military confrontation, but it does not have to. It fights indirectly, through forces that are difficult to target, in countries that are difficult to bomb, using tactics that are difficult to counter without enormous cost. And above all this network, hanging over the entire region like a sword, is Iran's nuclear program, a program that has continued advancing year after year, surviving sanctions, sabotage, and diplomatic pressure, inching ever closer to the threshold of a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia cannot live with a nuclear Iran. This is not posturing. This is existential. A nuclear Iran would permanently shift the balance of power in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia would be forced to either develop its own nuclear capability or accept permanent Iranian deterrence over its entire security strategy. Mohammed bin Salman has said publicly that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia will seek one too. This is not a bluff. The Saudis have the money, the political will, and the international connections to acquire nuclear technology if they decide they must. But they would much prefer to never reach that point. They would much prefer that someone else destroys Iran's nuclear program before that choice becomes necessary. That someone else, in every Saudi calculation, is the United States of America. So how do you get America to do that? How do you get a superpower that is publicly trying to reduce its Middle East footprint to recommit fully to a confrontation with Iran on your behalf? You find the right president, you find the right moment, and you tell him exactly what he wants to hear. The right president was Donald Trump. Trump had returned to the White House in January 2025, carrying a set of beliefs about Iran that were deep, consistent, and emotional. He had killed Qasem Soleimani in 2020, Iran's most powerful military commander, and considered it one of the defining moments of his first term. He believed that the Obama administration's nuclear deal had been a disaster, a gift to an evil regime that only accelerated its aggression. He believed that maximum pressure worked, that strength deterred, and that a decisive blow against Iran's nuclear capability would reshape the region in America's favor. He wanted to be the president who finally ended the Iranian nuclear threat. Saudi Arabia understood all of this, and Saudi Arabia delivered the message perfectly. In early 2025, Saudi Defense Minister Khalid bin Salman traveled to Washington. The meeting was described in vague diplomatic terms. But what happened inside was not vague at all. Khalid bin Salman told Trump that he should take direct military action against Iran. He said that without American force, the Iranian regime would strengthen, its nuclear program would advance, and the window for action would close permanently. He framed this not as a Saudi request, but as a strategic opportunity, the kind of decisive moment that great presidents seize and ordinary ones let pass. Trump heard the argument. Trump was persuaded. And Saudi Arabia went home. Here's the part that deserves to be said slowly, because it is the core of everything. Even as Saudi Arabia's defense minister was urging American military action in Washington, Saudi Arabia was making very different commitments to its own military and to its Gulf neighbors. Behind the scenes, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE quietly communicated that they would not participate in any strike on Iran. There were no visible military preparations at Saudi bases. There were no Saudi aircraft being moved into offensive positions. There were no Saudi military liaisons embedded with American strike planning teams. Saudi Arabia lobbied for war, then excused itself from the fight. Meanwhile, American military assets began moving at extraordinary speed and scale. The USS Abraham Lincoln, one of America's two nuclear-powered Nimitz-class supercarriers, was pulled out of the South China Sea, let that sink in for a moment, and redirected toward the Arabian Sea. This was not a routine repositioning. The South China Sea is the most strategically important body of water in the world right now. China's military expansion, its artificial island bases, its assertions of territorial control over international waters, all of this demands American carrier presence in that theater. Pulling the Lincoln away was a significant signal. It meant the Middle East had climbed back to the top of America's military priority list, ahead of everything else, including China. 2 weeks after the Lincoln's redirection, Trump ordered the USS Gerald R. Ford to the region as well. The Gerald R. Ford is the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built. It displaces over 100,000 tons. It can carry over 90 aircraft. It has electromagnetic aircraft launch systems, advanced radar, and anti-ballistic missile defense. It is the most expensive single warship in human history, costing approximately $13 billion to build. And now it was sailing toward the Persian Gulf with 3 guided missile destroyers alongside it, and over 5,000 additional sailors on board. By February 2026, the United States had positioned 14 warships in the waters around Iran. Alongside the carriers and destroyers, American air forces had forward deployed to the entire region in numbers not seen in years. 48 F-16 fighter jets were distributed across bases in Jordan, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. 30 F-35A stealth fighters, the most advanced tactical aircraft in the American inventory, were forward staged for potential operations. 6 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, whose primary purpose is to destroy enemy air defense systems, had arrived in theater. Approximately 50 tanker aircraft capable of refueling strike jets in the air were positioned across the region. American military cargo flights had surged to roughly 300 sorties since mid-January, flowing weapons, spare parts, ammunition, and support equipment into the theater. This is not a deterrence posture. This is a strike posture. And not one of those aircraft belongs to Saudi Arabia. Not one of those ships is flying a Saudi flag. Not one of those pilots wears a Saudi uniform. The financial cost of maintaining this presence is almost impossible for ordinary people to grasp. A carrier strike group in active deployment costs somewhere between $6 and $10 million per day to operate. 2 carrier strike groups, plus the additional air assets and support forces, means America is spending well over $15 million every single day to maintain this posture. For what? In service of whose strategic interests? Not primarily America's. America has no direct territorial dispute with Iran. America has no oil fields at immediate risk. American cities are not within range of Iranian missiles. American soil is not threatened by Iranian proxies. The direct, immediate, concrete threat that Iran poses is not to America. It is to Saudi Arabia, to Israel, and to the Gulf states. But the Gulf states are not paying $15 million a day. America is. And as all of this American power piles up in the Persian Gulf, Iran is not sitting quietly. Tehran watches American carrier groups the way a chess player watches an opponent's queen. Every movement is noted, analyzed, and responded to. Iran has been explicit about what it will do if America attacks. Iranian military officials have stated publicly that American bases across the Gulf region, in Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE, would be considered legitimate military targets in the event of any American strike on Iranian territory. This is not an idle threat from a weak country. Iran has the missiles to reach every one of those bases. Iran has tested and demonstrated ballistic missiles capable of hitting targets more than 2,000 kilometers away. It has combat-proven drone technology. It has the proxy forces to activate simultaneously across multiple countries. The United States has taken these threats seriously enough that it has begun protective measures. Hundreds of American troops have been quietly moved out of Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American air base in the Middle East, the command hub for operations across the entire region. Forces associated with the Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain have also been repositioned. These are not dramatic evacuations. They are careful, professional precautions. But they tell you everything about how seriously American military planners take the possibility of Iranian retaliation. Think about what that means in practice. America has positioned its most powerful military assets in a theater where those assets could themselves become targets. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the most expensive warship ever built, is now within range of Iranian anti-ship ballistic missiles. Iran has specifically developed weapons designed to sink aircraft carriers. The DF-21D, a missile with a range of over 1,500 kilometers, and a maneuvering warhead designed to hit moving ships, has been a reference point for American naval planners for years. Iran has its own versions of this concept. A carrier is a massive, slow-moving, extremely visible target. Its defensive systems are sophisticated but not infallible. America has sailed $13 billion of warship into waters where that warship can be sunk, and Saudi Arabia watches from the shore. There's a strategic doctrine that American military planners had been working toward for years. It was called burden shifting, or sometimes offshore balancing. The idea was simple and sensible. America would remain the ultimate guarantor of security in the Middle East, but the wealthy regional powers, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, would take the lead on day-to-day security, funding their own militaries, sharing the risks, and handling the smaller crises that did not require American intervention. Washington would be the backstop, not the front line. America would pivot toward Asia, toward the real long-term strategic challenge of managing China's rise, and let the Gulf states carry their own weight. Saudi Arabia looked at this doctrine and essentially dismantled it, not through confrontation, not through refusing the framework, by making the framework impossible to apply when it mattered most. When the moment came, when the Iran problem reached the point where decisive action seemed necessary, Saudi Arabia made sure that America felt it was the one who had to act, while Saudi Arabia remained carefully outside the line of fire. This matters for America's China strategy in ways that cannot be overstated. Every week that American carriers sit in the Persian Gulf is a week they do not sit in the Taiwan Strait. Every dollar spent on maintaining this posture in the Middle East is a dollar not spent on the kind of Pacific-focused capabilities that a long-term competition with China requires. Submarines, advanced missiles, cyber capabilities, space-based systems. These are the tools of the real 21st century competition. But aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf eat resources. They burn money. They occupy the attention of planners and commanders who should be focused on a different ocean. Chinese military analysts understand this perfectly. Beijing tracks American carrier positions with the same obsessive attention that American analysts track Chinese military activities in the Pacific. Every week, the Lincoln and the Ford remain in the Middle East is a week of breathing room for Chinese strategic planners. Not because China is ready to act, but because every reduction in American Pacific presence widens the margin of error in China's calculations. Saudi Arabia has managed, quite elegantly, to redirect American strategic energy away from the one arena where it most needs to be focused and back into the one arena where Saudi Arabia most needs it to be present. Without firing a single shot, without spending a single dollar, and without losing a single soldier, Riyadh has shaped American grand strategy to serve Saudi strategic interests. This is the trap. Not a conspiracy with signatures and secret handshakes. Something more sophisticated and more durable. A structural arrangement reinforced by money, politics, arms deals, energy markets, and the long institutional memory of an American foreign policy establishment that cannot imagine a Middle East without American carriers in it. What happens now? This is the question that cuts through all the strategy and all the analysis and arrives at the place where real people's lives hang in the balance. If America strikes Iran's nuclear facilities, the immediate military outcome could favor the United States. Air power, stealth technology, precision munitions. America could do serious damage to Iran's nuclear program and set it back by years, perhaps longer. But then the day after arrives. And the day after a strike on Iran is one of the most dangerous days in Middle Eastern history that has never yet happened. Iran activates everything. Hezbollah launches from Lebanon. Not a few rockets. The full weight of over 100,000 projectiles aimed at Israeli cities, American bases, and Gulf infrastructure simultaneously. Iraqi Shia militias attack American forces at bases across Iraq. The Houthis, already proven dangerous after years of combat experience in Yemen, escalate in the Red Sea, targeting shipping, naval vessels, and coastal infrastructure. Iran launches its own ballistic missiles at American bases in Qatar and Bahrain and Kuwait. The entire region ignites at once, in every direction, and America finds itself fighting not one war, but 5 simultaneously. Saudi Arabia closes its airspace and issues a diplomatic statement urging restraint. Saudi Arabia does not shoot down a single Houthi missile. Saudi Arabia does not commit a single soldier. And if America does not strike, then the most expensive naval deployment in recent memory serves as an extremely costly deterrent that Iran learns to wait out. The carriers cannot stay forever. They have maintenance cycles, personnel rotations, other responsibilities. Eventually, they go home. And when they do, Iran will have learned that American resolve has limits, that American patience has an expiration date, and that the way to survive American pressure is simply to endure it. Neither outcome serves clear American interests. Both outcomes serve Saudi interests. One gives Saudi Arabia a weakened Iran. The other gives Saudi Arabia a continued American military presence in its neighborhood at no cost to Riyadh. The trap holds either way. There is no easy answer to how America escapes this. The institutional forces that keep the United States committed to the Middle East are powerful and deeply embedded. The arms industry, the intelligence establishment, the think tanks and former officials who cycle between government and defense contractors, the political culture that treats military restraint as weakness and military engagement as strength. These are not small obstacles to overcome. But the first step to escaping a trap is recognizing that you are in one, and that recognition has been startlingly absent from the public conversation in America. The debate focuses on Iran's threats, on the technical capabilities of American carriers and Iranian missiles. Almost nobody asks the simpler, more fundamental question, who wanted this to happen and why are they not here? 14 warships in the Arabian Sea, 2 of the most powerful machines of war ever constructed by human civilization. Thousands of American men and women at sea, far from home in waters that could turn violent at any moment. Billions of American dollars flowing out every week. The strategic attention of the world's most powerful military locked onto a region where the richest and most directly threatened state has decided that the fighting is not its job. That is the trap. Built not from iron bars and concrete walls, but from strategy, psychology, money, and the quiet understanding that the most powerful country in the world can be moved not by force, but by the careful management of its interests and its fears. The carriers sail on. The warships hold position. The pilots wait in their ready rooms. And in Riyadh, in a palace built on oil and secured by someone else's navy, the crown prince waits with patience and with purpose. He is not anxious. He is not uncertain. He has done what great strategists always do throughout history. He defined the problem in his opponent's terms, shaped the options that were available, and made the most powerful country in the world feel like it was making a free choice. The trap was never a cage. It was a current, invisible, irresistible, already moving. And America, with 14 warships and all the firepower in the world, swam right into it. Now let us zoom out further and look at something that the mainstream conversation almost completely misses. Because what Saudi Arabia did with the United States is not new. It is not even unique. It is part of a pattern so consistent and so old that it has become invisible. Since the end of World War II, Saudi Arabia has managed to remain one of the most protected countries on earth while spending relatively little of its own blood defending itself. The kingdom has one of the largest defense budgets in the world in absolute terms. It regularly spends between $70 and $80 billion a year on its military. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest buyers of American weapons on the planet, F-15 jets, Patriot missile batteries, billions in munitions, vehicles, and naval equipment. Saudi Arabia buys the hardware of military power in staggering quantities. But buying weapons is not the same as being willing to use them. Saudi Arabia's military has a complicated record in actual combat. The Yemen War, launched in 2015 by Mohammed bin Salman himself, was supposed to be a short, decisive campaign to crush the Houthis and restore the internationally recognized Yemeni government. Nearly a decade later, the Houthis are still standing, still fighting, still launching missiles and drones into Saudi territory, and still threatening international shipping in the Red Sea. The Saudi air campaign dropped an enormous number of bombs. It also killed a catastrophic number of civilians and drew widespread international condemnation. But it did not win. Saudi Arabia, with all its American-purchased firepower, could not defeat a militia operating from the mountains of one of the poorest countries on earth. That failure taught Mohammed bin Salman something important. Direct military action is expensive, unpredictable, and politically dangerous. It produces casualties that arrive home in flag-draped boxes. It creates enemies. It invites criticism. It can fail in embarrassing and very public ways. If there is another option, if someone more powerful and with more military capacity can be convinced to do the heavy lifting, that is always the better choice. America is that other option. America is always that other option. This is why the arms purchases matter so much as part of the strategy. Saudi Arabia buying billions of dollars in American weapons creates an entire ecosystem of American interests dependent on maintaining the Saudi relationship. Defense contractors, lobbyists, congressional representatives from states where those weapons are manufactured, military officials who rotate between the Pentagon and defense industry jobs. All of these people and institutions benefit from keeping Saudi Arabia happy and keeping the relationship close. When Saudi Arabia needs something from Washington, it has an enormous number of voices already in place to argue its case. The political leverage goes even deeper. Saudi Arabia holds a uniquely powerful position in global oil markets through its leadership of OPEC+. The kingdom can increase or reduce oil production in ways that affect global energy prices almost immediately. High oil prices hurt American consumers, weaken economic growth, and damage the political standing of whoever happens to be president. Low oil prices favor American consumers, but hurt American shale producers. Saudi Arabia can pull either lever with considerable effect. Every American president knows this. And it introduces a subtle but persistent pressure into every American-Saudi interaction. A background awareness that the relationship must be maintained, that Saudi sensitivities must be respected, and that making Riyadh angry has real economic consequences. Add to this the diplomatic dimension. Saudi Arabia has positioned itself as an indispensable broker in regional politics. The Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab states, were partly built on Saudi Arabia, its tacit approval and indirect facilitation. The possibility of a Saudi-Israeli normalization deal, which would represent a historic transformation of Middle Eastern politics, is one that American administrations have chased aggressively. Riyadh understands exactly how much Washington wants that deal, and Riyadh has used that desire as leverage, conditioning its diplomatic cooperation on American security commitments that go far beyond what any formal treaty requires. So you have weapons purchases generating pro-Saudi lobbying in Washington. You have oil production decisions that affect American economic conditions. You have diplomatic leverage over the most sought-after deal in Middle Eastern politics. And on top of all of that, you have a personal relationship between the Saudi crown prince and a sitting American president who was disposed by temperament and ideology to take the argument Saudi Arabia was making. It is almost too complete. Every lever that could be used to pull America into this position was being pulled simultaneously, and now the sailors are at sea. Think for a moment about what it means to be one of the 5,000 American service members who are currently deployed on those 14 warships in the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. You did not choose the geopolitics. You did not decide that American carriers should be redirected from the Pacific. You did not negotiate the arms deals or attend the meetings in Washington where Saudi officials made their case. You just got orders. You packed your bag, kissed your family, and went to sea, and now you are sitting on a steel ship in waters where an adversary has openly promised to target you if your country makes a certain decision. You are a piece on a board that was arranged by people who will face none of the same consequences you will face if things go wrong. That is not an abstraction. That is 5,000 real people and their families inserted into a situation created by a geopolitical arrangement that most Americans have never heard explained clearly. The American public is largely not having a serious conversation about what is happening in the Gulf right now. The news covers it in tactical terms. Carrier group here, warship there, Iran said this, Trump said that. But the strategic picture, the question of why America is in this position and whether it serves American interests, is barely discussed. Most Americans do not know that 14 warships have been deployed. Most Americans do not know that a carrier was pulled from the Pacific. Most Americans do not know that Saudi Arabia urged this escalation while refusing to participate in it. That information gap is not an accident. Complexity and strategic abstraction do not make for popular news coverage, and Saudi Arabia benefits from that gap. The less the American public understands about how this arrangement actually works, the harder it is to build political resistance to it. The great historian Barbara Tuchman wrote about something she called the March of Folly. Always the tendency of governments to pursue policies that are obviously against their own interests, not out of ignorance, but while knowing better. She documented it across centuries of history. The decisions were always made by intelligent, informed people who could see the problems clearly but were trapped by institutional momentum, political incentives, and the weight of past commitments. What is happening in the Persian Gulf today fits that description with uncomfortable precision. American officials know the burden-shifting strategy is the right long-term approach. American military strategists know that Pacific readiness should be the priority. American economists know the cost-benefit ratio of this deployment is deeply unfavorable. American diplomats know that Saudi Arabia has extracted commitment without offering reciprocal risk-sharing. The knowledge is there. The analysis exists. And still, 14 ships sail because the trap is not just geographic. It is institutional. It is cultural. It is the accumulated weight of 8 decades of American Middle Eastern involvement, layered into alliances, into base infrastructure, into intelligence relationships, into the belief systems of a foreign policy establishment that has built careers and identities around American engagement in the region. Getting out of this trap, if America ever decides it wants to, will require something harder than redirecting a carrier strike group. It will require a fundamental rethinking of what America owes its Middle Eastern partners, what those partners owe America in return, and whether the entire arrangement still makes sense in a world where China is the defining strategic challenge, and the Middle East is a secondary theater being managed to serve the interests of a monarchy that does not fight its own wars. That conversation has started. In think tanks and in military journals and in congressional hearings, voices are raising these questions with increasing urgency. But it has not yet produced a political movement capable of changing the fundamental direction of American policy. Until it does, the carriers will stay, the ships will hold position. The budget will keep bleeding. In Saudi Arabia, patient, strategic, protected by someone else's navy and someone else's ocean, will keep watching and waiting and winning. 14 warships. That is the price of the trap. That is the weight of the arrangement. That is what it costs America every single day to remain the guarantor of a region where the most threatened and the wealthiest state has decided that the risk and the sacrifice and the strategic exposure belong to someone else. The waters of the Persian Gulf are calm today. The carriers move slowly through them, their radar sweeping, their flight decks busy, their sailors doing their jobs with professionalism and dedication. The trap is comfortable. It is even beautiful in its way. The power, the technology, the sheer physical statement of 2 nuclear carriers in formation on a blue sea under a desert sky. But beauty and comfort do not change what it is. Saudi Arabia set the current running. America swam into it, and the current is still flowing, deep and cold and invisible beneath the surface, right where Saudi Arabia needed it to be.